What's up, Wildside besties and baddies? I'm Bailey.
And I'm Chelsea, and we're here to walk you through the wild sides.
From homicides to hosticides and everything in between.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
Let's go! If you want it, you can get it. Let me know. Let me know. I'm about to this thing up. What's up?
What's up?
What's up? What's up? Okay, so we're going to start off with just more exciting news. What is exciting is that we have a new review, and it's from Casey Mindy, and we're going to say it every time, and y'all are going to be like, we hate that you start every episode with reviews, and that's fine. You can just skip the first.
You can hate that, but we're not going to stop doing it.
Because we think it's so sweet, and we want to thank the people who have spent their time to give us a review. So we just want to be kind.
Casey Mindy, you are the bomb.com, sister girl. All right, so Chelsea is slamming a BC powder and throwing it back with some Dr. Pepper. We've been struggling with like the worst headaches, both of us. So we're just going to do this. We're going to do this thing.
Yeah, I feel like my new introduction should be like, hi, I'm Chelsea. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, and I have headaches. Because it seems to be part of me as of late. Like, I don't know why I'm getting all these headaches, but here we are.
Here we are. All right, you guys. So this case that we're going to do is going to end up being a two-parter.
I like two-parters.
Two-parters are cool. And again, we'll release them pretty close back to back. You won't have to wait a full week to get the second part.
Ooh, or maybe we'll make you wait a full week.
No, we won't.
If you leave us a bad review, we're going to make you wait a full week.
So this episode is going to be really, really interesting because we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to be talking about the Satanic Panic. Yeah.
Shut up. Oh, you didn't tell me. Oh, I'm so excited.
Yep. So I wanted to give a little background on the origins of the Satanic Panic in this episode to understand the implications it had on murder investigations in America in the 80s and 90s. Like most of you guys, I'm sure, I was one of those people who I was familiar with the term Satanic Panic, but I wasn't really sure what it was, how it originated, and that kind of thing. So I did a whole lot of research. And one of the things that I'm going to ask y'all, including you, Chelsea, is I want you guys to enter this case with a wide open mind. Okay. I went into this case out of curiosity, and I am walking away with a totally different perspective. This is honestly the wildest, deepest rabbit hole of a case I've read.
This is like the Narnia closet. Like you're going in thinking that you're going to find a pair of slippers and a robe, and you end up in a frozen tundra.
This is what I am dubbing the East Coast versions of the West Memphis 3. And so I encourage our listeners to follow the evidence, keep a rational mind throughout this super convoluted and super complex case of, are you ready for it?
I'm ready for it.
The Fall River Cult murders.
Fall. Those are all my favorite things in one sentence. I love fall. I love rivers. And I kind of like cults after doing the Rick Ross murders. That's one of my not favorite things.
Even if you guys are familiar with this case or vaguely familiar, if you've listened to like another podcast on it, I promise you, you have never heard it like this before.
You wrong.
I'm going to start off the rabbit hole of this. You guys are going to have to pay attention because there's a lot of players in this case. There's a lot of twists and turns, but you won't regret it.
I'm so excited.
I'm going to start off giving a background of Satanic Panic because it's very important to understand the dynamics of this case. Plus, I get to nerd out and educate people about shit that I researched.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. Let's talk about the Satanic Panic. So, Satanic Ritual Abuse Scare, better known as Satanic Panic, began in the 1980s in North America and lasted throughout much of the 1990s. So this is almost 2 decades worth of kind of a time frame. All right. So, arguably, the earliest catalyst to this panic was lesser known to my next point, but still likely a major catalyst. It was the disappearance of a gentleman named James Dallas Egbert III. Okay. So, this whole case starts way in the root system, and we go out through all these different branches. And this arguably is the first domino to fall.
Mm-hmm.
James Dallas Egbert III, he was a genius and he was a prodigy, and he was attending Michigan State University in the 70s. On August 15th of 1979, James disappeared. During his disappearance, the media blew up about his disappearance. There were reports that he had been participating in the fantasy role-playing game.
Is Dungeons and Dragons?
Yep, D&D.
Do you know that I had patients one time and they met at a D&D conference in like the UK?
More power to you.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And so when this gentleman disappeared, the media blew up and he saying that he was a part of Dungeons and Dragons. And this is what really kind of propelled D&D into nationwide attention. According to an article by Jason Louv, the connection of the role-playing game to Egbert's disappearance prompted coverage both on Egbert's disappearance and the game in media outlets throughout the entire United States. And this is when D&D kind of started to be a pawn for the Satanic Panic time period. And they would dub this game as a, quote, bizarre and secretive cult, and that players could only join, quote, by invitation. And I dug for this. Not a lot of people count this as the beginning, but time frame wise, this is really kind of the first domino from what I researched to the Satanic Panic.
Kind of like you heard it here first.
Yeah, I'm letting you guys know that I did a lot of research on this. This is a 23-page paper. I'm a little proud of it.
What do you guys do in your spare time? Well, so happy you asked.
So shortly after James's disappearance, and he was eventually found, a second event spurred what would become almost 2 decades of this whole Satanic Panic. And it came from a book that was written and later published by a Canadian woman, and her name was Michelle Smith. In this book, titled Michelle Remembers, she claims that during therapy, she had recovered memories of physical and sexual abuse by people who were involved in the occult or satanic rituals. Okay, so this woman wrote this book. She had recovered memories, and this is arguably like the huge catalyst to the Satanic Panic.
Okay.
This book included inserts from the work with her therapist, which included hypnosis and the alleged discovery of these new memories. Now, you guys know I'm a therapist, and I'm real judgy about like therapeutic ethics. This book was co-written by her therapist, who was a psychiatrist and a fellow at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. His name was Lawrence Padzer, who would later go on to marry her.
Do I need to ask? Do I need to say anything?
No, because in all caps, I wrote, can I just tell you how much I hate this shit right now? This is the most unethical shit. I'm not even allowed to be friends on social media for a minimum of 5 years after therapy has ceased, and you go on, sir, to marry your client.
I'm going to just let you have the comments on that one.
So this therapist-patient duo went on a huge book tour in the U.S., and it was them sharing about the threat of satanic worship and rituals. And so this is where this kind of domino effect starts to go down. Come to find out, there was no evidence that this ever happened, and it has since been discredited by professionals. They're kind of saying that this alleged memory recovery is not that accurate. So not long after Michelle Smith's book was published, in 1983, there was the McMartin preschool trial. Do you remember this, Chels?
What year is this?
83.
I do not remember this.
It was a major case that became national news due to allegations that this daycare was the center of satanic ritual abuse in children.
No, I don't know this. I don't think.
So arguably, this McMartin preschool case and trial was the first of what would be more than 100 preschools across the country to have similar allegations. So this preschool trial was essentially saying that these preschool owners had like a satanic ritual going on at their preschool, and all these kids were sexually abused. And it was massive.
Oh, yeah. I imagine this is like you have Salem witch trials, and then you have these guys.
Yeah. And so Michelle Smith, the author of that book that I was telling you about, and other alleged survivors of this satanic cult force even met with the parents of the children of the McMartin preschool to, provide support and bond over the horror of being the victim of satanic worship and ritualistic practices. I told you guys this is a super complex, convoluted case. And so I'm putting all of this in here because you have to see how it lines up.
Right.
And so a woman by the name of Margaret Talbot did a really great article on this. She essentially posits that the McMartin preschool case is really thought to be the beginning of the irrational approach by government and law enforcement officials to cases that hinted to satanic worship and ritual, right? So she was saying that this case really hooked law enforcement in the system into getting into these allegations and prosecuting the occult, satanic worship, ritual, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
But also, kind of as a fun fact, this case was also a huge contributing factor to mandatory reporting laws around children. Started in the 60s, but it really fine-tuned itself because of all of this.
Yeah, it's always interesting to see how these things are kind of double-edged swords, right? Like it can cause a lot of damage, right, for false allegations, but it can also produce some really great laws and reform, stuff like that.
Yeah. And maybe one day we'll actually cover the McMartin preschool because it's wild.
Yeah, we really should.
So needless to say, these three cases, the one with the missing boy at the beginning, the woman who had these recovered ritual abuse memories with her therapist and then soon to be husband, and then the McMartin preschool, these were three huge catalysts to the Satanic Panic period.
We might have to start another podcast devoted to just 80s crime.
I would be so into that. So it took no time for other victims, other reports of victims of this satanic worship cult that was spreading like a wildfire. The waves of panic stemmed from a collective moral concern amongst the masses, right? So everybody's just like, it's the devil and it's, the occult we're worshiping. And it just swept like a wildfire throughout, especially the United States.
Yeah.
A wave of panic fueled by claims of Satan worship that gripped the country. It was this overwhelming frenzied panic that the country shared because of the threat of Satan coming into the world and taking over. It sounds ridiculous now when we talk about it, but I've watched a lot of interviews and like TV reports during the Satanic Panic, and this stuff, y'all, it's wild. I don't know another word for it. Like the police videos about how to investigate like ritualized satanic abuse. They're going to have a pentagram cut into their stomach. I mean, it's crazy. Okay.
Now, I'm going to pause just for 1 second. Now, obviously, these people are thinking that, satanic cult worship is the answer, but I'm wondering, like, what was their problem? You know what I mean? Like, what was the societal problem that they were like, oh my gosh? And the answer is, the scapegoat is.
So I think I might touch on that in just a second.
Okay.
I don't know if I'll answer it, but I'll touch on that.
Okay, perfect.
The Satanic Panic was believed to involve an entire array of things to include child and sexual abuse, human ritual sacrifice, rumor of teenage abductions, animal sacrifice and mutilation, claims of Satanists, so the Church of Satan and the Temple of Set, and even went as far as dubbing heavy metal, rock, and horrorcore music, along with violent and fantasy games, as the work of the devil. So this wave of mass hysteria was sexual, child abuse, ritual sacrifice of humans, animals, heavy metal music. I mean, this whole array of stuff, right? It was contributed to thousands of unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse. So by the late 1980s, therapists or patients who believed someone had suffered from SRA, so satanic ritual Abuse, SRA, could suggest solutions that included Christian psychotherapy, exorcism, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful. And support groups whose members self-identified as anti-satanic warriors. So, hey, we have all of your answers. Go to a Christian psychotherapist, be exorcised, and join a support group with anti-satanic warriors.
I have a feeling that this is also answering the question of why did like the 90s Christian culture get so crazy as well. Like I think probably the precursor to the what would Jesus do,
Yes,
promise ring,
1,000%
belts of the 90s.
Now, I was really interested in the concept of widespread panic from like a sociological standpoint, kind of like what you're talking about. So I did some research and brought that into this episode. You guys will get crime, I promise, but you need to have this, okay? There have been similar patterns throughout history, Chelsea, as you spoke to, one being the Salem witch trials.
Yes.
But the truth is, these panic hysteria around good versus evil, God versus the devil, has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? It's like rinse and repeat. According to an article by Good and Ben Yehuda, these historical episodes represent explosions of fear and concern at a particular time and place about a specific perceived threat.
Yes.
Okay. It could be demonic possession. It could be witchcraft, worshiping the devil, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so what this article presents is that there is a catalyst or an agent that is socially agreed upon, kind of non-verbally, but socially agreed upon as the threat that triggers a social panic. Okay?
Yes.
I honestly think we're kind of in one because there's a lot of panic about a lot of things, right? Yes. These researchers, they say once things have calmed down, a sober assessment arises in which it is identified that the responses to this perceived threat were likely exaggerated or misplaced. So everybody gets wrapped up in this hysteria. And then once they kind of sober up, everything calms down. They look back and they're like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have hanged all these women who probably weren't witches because they had a birthmark.
Right. And this is also what happened. This is what catapulted the U.S. into the roaring 20s. But the U.S. has seen this like in our lifetime. This happened again after the end of the World War I. And that's what brought us into the roaring 20s and why people just got like, we're rolling our stockings down. We're cutting our hair
off. Prohibition and stuff, all of that.
Prohibition and the beginning of the KKK. Yes, it's, again, you are scared of whatever it is, and you go in one of two ways. You either say, we're all going to die anyway, let's cut loose, or you double down and you're scared and you're going to start bringing out the pitchforks and the whatever those fire things on a stick are called. Like torches.
I was thinking of like flame catapults, but torches make so much worse.
No, just torches. That's it. Nothing
And so this whole thing that we've been talking about, sociologists refer to such episodes as moral panics. So that's what it's deemed in the sociological arena. They arise as a consequence of specific social forces and dynamics. They arise because, according to, again, these authors, as with all sociological phenomena, threats are culturally and politically constructed. A product of the human imagination. So it is a human designed perceived threat with no usual factual origins backing.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And people just, it's like an infection.
Yeah. Oh, it's hysteria.
And again, it talks a lot about Salem witch trial, and society becomes the judge, jury, and executioner. And judges, law enforcement officers, therapists, doctors, these people all kind of get swept up into it.
Correct.
So to add to this panic, you have these professionals that are being swept up in it also, and you believe it, right? You don't think that what you're doing is weird or different or crazy. It's just like, oh, we've got all of this, Satan's really popping his head up. And so we've got to help people protect themselves against it. Right.
Yeah, you become trailblazers or spearheads. I mean, you're just like, I've got to do something good to combat this.
I mean, they had conferences about Satanic Panic. Police forces did trainings, churches did trainings. I mean, it was everywhere. It was a wave of hysteria. So, though it was initially started with good intentions, arguably it became an explosive agent to an already lit match of society in general. So, in his book, Satanic Panic, Jeffrey Victor writes that in the United States, the groups most likely to believe rumors of Satanic Panic or Satanic Ritual Abuse were rural, poorly educated, religious, conservative, white, blue-collar families with an unquestioning belief in American values who feel significant anxieties over job loss, economic decline, and family disintegration.
Right.
Which I think that tracks.
Yeah.
He considers, so this author, Victor, considers rumors of SRA a symptom of a moral crisis and a form of scapegoating for economic and social ills. Exactly what she said, right? And what's interesting is the Satanic Panic period is like a mesh of the occult and cults, even though they're two very separate things. Do we need to go over that, like occult versus cult, or do you think we're good?
I mean, I always love the story that you have on not realizing that those were two separate things.
Oh, until I was a whole grown-ass person.
Right. But yeah, I mean, I think you could quickly say
occult with an O matters regarded as involving the action or influence of supernatural or supernormal powers or some secret knowledge of them. So dark, mysterious, macabre, morbid, whatever.
Yeah.
Cult is a system of religious beliefs and rituals where there is a great devotion to a person, an idea, object, movement, work. So you can be into the occult, but you're not in a cult.
Right. And sometimes you have cults that are devoted to
the occults.
Yes.
So the Satanic Panic period really viewed anything regarding interest or fascination in the occult as a formal satanic cult, like you said. And, so most of the time, teenagers during this time would like draw pentagrams, light candles, and claim that they were doing this, that, and the other, mostly because they were probably just being assholes.
Yeah. I mean,
but they were not possessed by Satan, and they weren't part of a formalized cult 99% of the time.
Well, and I'm pretty sure, I mean, I remember hearing stories that people were like, yeah, and if you spin this record backwards, you hear
like 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah, exactly. Like I remember people got into like, if you flip this CD backward, I guess they didn't have CDs yet, but if you flip this album and spin it backwards, you'll hear all this like occult chanting stuff. So yeah, I think it just kind of, almost like urban legends, and kids were like, ooh, no way, let's try to spin our records back.
Right, and you get wrapped up in that.
Yeah. Older people are just like, what?
Yeah, and so you guys are going to see how in this case, there's a lot of really interesting connect the dots that create this crazy rabbit hole. This case is called the Fall River Cult Murders because this all takes place in a town called Fall River. And so Fall River is a town that's about an hour outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and is part of the South Coast region of Massachusetts. Interestingly enough, it is a historic mill city and is also known for the notorious true crime case of Lizzie Borden.
Oh, no way.
The case where she allegedly hacked her stepmother and father to death in 1892.
Yeah.
So this is the same town. So not only is this during the Satanic Panic, it happens in the same town where there's this like super spooky,
superstitious.
Yeah, there's like superstition because this is the same town that this crazy case happened 100 years before. And this town, Fall River, remains a predominantly Roman Catholic city.
Yeah.
So now you have also a heavy layer of individuals who are super religious. And I'm not hating on the super religious. I'm
No.
just saying
That's the dynamic.
during this time, right?
Yeah.
Satanic Panic and in Fall River with this history and its very heavily zealous Roman Catholic upbringings and families, that's going to make sense as to what we're going to be getting into.
Yeah. Baking soda is not bad. Vinegar is not bad. You add it together and you're going to have a volcano.
Yeah, it's a really good way to say it. I like that. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
So there was a 4-part docuseries by director James Buddy Day titled Fall River that was released in 2021. If you guys haven't seen it, it's really great. You should watch it. And between hopefully this episode and James Day's movie or documentary, you're going to really look at this totally differently than you've heard it before. So according to Max Miranda's article, this 4-part docuseries paints a picture of the Fall River area that has been influenced by the dark and mysterious, and it was a place that was pocketed with sex work, drugs, and crime. So painting this picture, this is kind of what we're starting to get into.
Mm-hmm.
So Fall River at the time of this case is kind of seedy. There's a lot of drugs, a lot of sex work. And even though there were kind of shady things going on, arguably, police would turn the other way.
Right.
I want to say that this wave of hysteria started just a month before this shit show started. Okay. So this is when things are really ramping up nationally, and then you're going to see this whole thing locally. The entire case of the Fall River murders begins way back on the last year of the 1970s, so 1979, and it's centered around the deaths of 3 females, 1 teenager and 2 young women. On October 13th, 1979, police are paged around 6:30 in the morning and asked to respond on scene at the Diamond Regional Vocational Technical High School, where just a few moments prior, a couple of women jogging came across a female body, and she was in a pool of blood under the bleachers. When police arrived, they were met with a gruesome and horrifying scene. It was what appeared to be a teenager or a young adult female victim who had appeared to have been viciously murdered, and it appeared to be a fresh homicide. This woman was found face down. She was nude from the waist down, and her hands were clasped in front of her, and along with her legs, they were bound by white fishing line. She also was found with a baseball bat inserted in her, and it was apparent that she had been severely beaten.
Oh my gosh. Can I just say that I'm convinced that I'm gonna jog across somewhere and find a body. I've been convinced of this for a really long time. I think it's because you hear these stories and I'm just like, can you imagine you're just out like living your best life, right? And then you're like, that's a body with a baseball bat in it. Can you imagine how shocking and horrifying that would be?
No.
For everybody involved.
Yeah. And so, like I said, it was apparent that she had been severely beaten. Her face was totally unrecognizable. Her skull was crushed by multiple blows. And she had a hole on the inside of her ear that indicated she was stabbed either with a knife or an ice pick.
Oh gosh.
There was blood splattered across rocks that were close by her body, and it was determined that those rocks were the murder weapon. Because this woman had been so badly beaten, she was taken to St. Anne's Hospital for an autopsy, and a composite picture was created. This is the only way she was able to be positively identified.
Oh, goodness. That is horrific.
Yeah. A friend recognized the picture and eventually gave a positive ID as the victim being 17-year-old Doreen Levesque. It would soon be identified that Doreen Levesque was a teenage runaway from New Bedford, Massachusetts, who had dropped out of high school and turned to sex work to survive and to support her drug addiction. She began working in the Fall River area because she did not want to be recognized in New Bedford. And what's notable about this killing is that it appeared to be personal.
I mean, yeah.
This wasn't just someone walked up, shot her, or cut her throat and walked away.
Right.
There was significant damage to the face. And what I've heard in other, cases or true crime things that I've watched or listened to is that like significant damage to the face can send a message that one, it's personal, and number two, that victim is under their assailant's control and trying to erase their identity.
I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah. So at the time, there were no clues as to who would want to kill Doreen, and not to mention so personally. So police decided to start their investigation by going to where she worked as a sex worker. They talked to the locals, people at the bars along the strip that she was known to work. They would try to speak to local sex workers and people of the sex work and drug webs in Fall River, hoping that they would find some information about what happened to Doreen. And what they found is a theme started to develop. Many individuals in this kind of soft white underbelly of Fall River would say that, quote, Satan controls the streets. And they were referring to a man named Carl Drew, who referred to himself as the son of Satan.
All right, Carl.
24-year-old Carl Drew was a known pander or pimp in the Fall River area with a pretty gnarly reputation. It was reported that he was a scary guy who exploited women and underage girls and controlled the sex work ring there in Fall River. He was tough and territorial, not having much patience for those who crossed his turf, as most are.
Yeah.
In an article by Rosemary Rossi, according to the former Fall River police detective Thomas Joachim, there was a lot of fear on the streets of Carl, the retribution that was going to be involved if anybody spoke. So nobody wanted to talk and turn him over because they were terrified of what he would do to them.
Right. Or even if they didn't say anything, if somebody was like, oh no, I saw your girl talking to cops. I saw,
Exactly. It was identified that Doreen had actually worked for Carl for about a year, and it was reported that she would pay him $200 for his protection. So,
Yeah,
you give him a cut, and then his reputation would protect her and keep her safe.
Right.
Other reports kind of say that people disagree with that, saying that Carl didn't have the capacity or the intention of protecting any of the girls under his thumb. So there was a lot of he said, she said about, he's a really bad guy. He's not a bad guy. He's just a guy who's involved in this trade, and that's just the nature of the business, right?
Right.
Investigators in Fall River at the time were not really able to interview Carl Drew because he didn't really make himself available to the police, right?
Right. He didn't wear a shirt that said, I am Carl Drew.
Right. He probably had one that said, I'm the son of Satan, but
it was probably bedazzled onto a leather jacket while he was listening to his Metallica.
Yeah. So he stayed in the shadows and did not make himself readily available to be interviewed by police. Right.
Yes. Right.
So what investigators quickly learned from kind of canvassing the people in the area while investigating Doreen's murder is that there was another name that kept being brought up, and her name is Robin Murphy. I'm going to call her a girl because she was a 17-year-old girl.
Okay.
Robin Murphy was what some people would refer to as a competing pimp.
Come on, say what?
She had early on turned to sex work for survival and was also a pimp in the sex work world in Fall River.
Can I just tell you that I think this is the first time I've ever thought about or considered the fact that a woman could be a pimp.
Yeah, so this is not my area of specialty, right? Like this isn't where I've spent a lot of my time professionally, but I'm pretty sure in a hierarchy there, I don't even know the name of it, but when it comes to a pimp and their kind of sex workers that they exploit and are under their thumb, there's usually kind of like a leading lady. So she's kind of the enforcer usually of the other women or girls of that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes.
I could be wrong, but For some reason, I'm pretty sure of that because I've read that and researched that before for some reason.
Okay.
Yeah. So Robin had a very similar reputation to that of Carl Drew. She was territorial and tough, even fist fighting grown ass men to keep her rankings on the street.
Okay.
So this girl, 17, rough life, we'll get into that later. She held her own.
She bad Mama Gemma.
Yeah. These two individuals will become kind of primary names in this case, so please hold on to that.
Okay, so Carl Drew and Robin Murphy. CDRM. CDRM. Yes.
Yep. While investigators were investigating the Doreen Levesque murder, just 3 months later, on January 26, 1980, another body was found. This body was found in a wooded area behind the R.E. Smith Company's plant in Fall River. A man had been out walking his beagle and the dog found a body.
Nope.
Due to the winter temperatures at the time, the body was frozen solid, which acted as a preservative agent, if you will.
Right. Yeah, slowed down decomp.
Yeah. This was the body of 19-year-old Barbara Raposa.
Okay.
She had been reported missing by her father in November, so a couple of months before that, after she did not pick up her son from the babysitter.
No.
Ooh. Barbara's body was found in an almost identical state as Doreen's.
No.
She had been badly beaten and her face was crushed. Like the other crime scene, there was a cement block close by, indicating that this was the murder weapon. So in the first one, there was a rock. This one, there was a cement block.
Okay.
Again, like Doreen, Barbara's hands and feet had been bound by the same white fishing line. And I want y'all to remember that.
Okay.
She was found lying on top of a huge stone that was literally referred to as being similar to an altar.
Ooh, creepy. Oh. Ooh, altar, Satanic Panic. Oh, we're starting to get some dots.
Yeah. Although Doreen and Barbara were all killed in a strikingly similar manner, almost identically, police didn't investigate them as a work of a single person.
Okay.
So, according to an article by Mark Lasecki, the investigation into the brutal killings resulted in a tabloid media frenzy with headlines that seemed to confirm the most outlandish satanic panic fear-mongering. Okay. In the end, the Fall River cult murders became the most sensational criminal case to come out of the city since Lizzie Borden. Okay. So that's
the
now
media gets a hold of it, right?
Yeah, so there's a third body in that, and I'm just about to get to that.
Okay.
But number 1 happened, number 2 happened. They don't think they're connected, and then number 3 happens, and now all of a sudden, media is starting to say we've got a serial killer. It's Satanic Panic, like it's Satan happening.
It's Satan, and yeah, it's connected to the occult.
Yes.
Gotcha.
And so this timeline is really crazy, and I'm doing my best to make it make sense. Okay. So Doreen Levesque was the first one
In October.
And then Barbara Raposa was January the following year. Okay.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yes.
Like 2 months later, 3 months later. So kind of backing up a little bit, just a month after the discovery of Doreen's body. So now we're back in November of 79. Right?
Yes.
A man walks into the Fall River Police Department by the name of Andy Maltais. Okay. So there's been one murder, and then this guy walks into a police station, and then the second victim has been missing, but her body has not been found yet.
Correct.
Okay. So Andy walks into the police department, and he wanted to file a missing persons report for his girlfriend, Barbara Raposa.
Oh, snap.
So Andy comes forward with a list of names that were supposedly a part of a group of roughly 10 people. This group was supposedly a group of people from the drug and sex work community in Fall River and who were involved in Satan worshiping.
Oh. Oh, they
So
were
this
double.
dude walks into a police station and was just like, I got a whole list for you guys.
And I want you to check and figure out where my girlfriend is.
Yes. The individuals of this alleged group was mostly made up of sex workers, and leader of the satanic sex ring, if you will, was none other than Carl Drew. So Andy walks into the police station. He's like, I got a list of people who are worshiping the devil. And the leader of this is Carl Drew.
Mm.
Apparently, the rumors on the street were that Carl Drew and these other Satan worshipers would go into the woods, do drugs, have sex, and do some ritualistic satanic shit.
Okay.
Andy, why would you know this?
Yeah, Andy. Well, because he wasn't invited and his feelings were hurt.
There's that. According to some reports, Carl Drew's home was filled with satanic artwork on walls and devil tattoos on people. Doreen Levesque's murder had given police a glimpse into the supposed satanic underbelly that existed, right? Because that started opening this door.
All right.
And with it, it gave investigators a circle of potential suspects, some of whom were already under investigation for illegal things such as drugs or sex work.
Right. Kind of. And because, again, Carl Drew probably was on their radar. And I'm sure now it's like, oh, now we might actually have something to go like after him with.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's a lot of reports that cops would look the other way with like the sex work and the drugs. But now the media has gotten a hold of what's been going on. Like this all kind of happens in quick succession. And so now the cops and the investigators are under a lot of pressure, like nationally.
Yes.
So it didn't take long for investigators to connect the dots and reinforce the concept that these murders were that of a ritualistic serial killer serving in the name of Satan who was ringleading a sex work satanic cult.
Yeah, it's just checking all the boxes.
Right. So while investigating these murders, in fact, detectives from Fall River's Major Crimes Division managed to witness one of their satanic worship sessions.
Say that again? He managed to witness it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. One of these satanic worships supposedly was held in a woman by the name of Sunny Sparta's apartment. And so investigators, they were doing their investigation. They knew who Sunny Sparta was. She invited them in. And apparently these detectives were firsthand witnessed that there was this like satanic worship going on in her apartment, that they were saying Hail Satan, they were chanting, etc.
But how could you be a Satan worshiper with the name Sunny Sparta? What a sweet name.
Yeah. So one woman questioned at one of these drop-ins by police was a woman by the name of Karen Marsden. I told you there's a lot of people involved in this. So we're
a lot of players.
Yeah. Karen Marsden, again, she was a sex worker, and she corroborated the rumor that this group was controlled by Carl Drew. So she said, yep, Carl's the satanic, cult leader for this group. She went on to add to investigators during this time that she was actually a witness to Doreen Levesque's murder.
Oh, pray tell.
So Karen takes detectives to a place deep in Fall River Forest where these so-called rituals took place.
Okay.
She claimed that Carl had taken her there and confessed to the murder.
Mm-hmm.
She expressed fears that she would be the next to die and was reportedly terrified of Carl Drew. So that's why she's all of a sudden sharing this stuff with investigators.
Yes.
Detective Sylvia with Fall River PD offers her protective custody, but she refuses. So while they're investigating this stuff, they were in Sunny Sparta's apartment. They were introduced to Karen Marsden. And there's a lot of like time in here, right? Back and forth of like working with police and not working with police and all of that. And that's when Karen eventually would tell them that this is what happened. Does that make sense? Soon after this whole interaction, on February 8th, 1980, Karen has not been seen, and she is officially reported missing.
Oh, I was just wondering what's going to happen to.
So a few months after her disappearance, on April 13th, 1980, a portion of a human skull was found in the woods near an area known as Family Beach in Westport, Massachusetts. A subsequent search of the area yielded various items of clothing, blood-stained rocks, jewelry, and a clump of hair.
Oh, gosh.
The remains, which consisted only of a skull with the upper jaw, were eventually identified as those of Karen Marsden.
Oh, gosh.
Having a belief that this skull belonged to Karen, authorities identified the remains by comparing bone fragments with skull x-rays taken in 1978. So that's how they found out.
Oh.
And the rest of her body was nowhere to be found. Detective Sylvia and his fellow detectives believed that Drew and his Satan-worshipping sex ring was responsible for these murders.
Mm-hmm.
Since Karen had told investigators that she had witnessed Doreen's murder, it became their theory that this was the motive for her death because she was a witness in the first murder.
Well, yes. I mean, case closed.
Right.
Done. Easy peasy.
The problem was that investigators had no proof that Carl Drew was the culprit behind any of these murders. So now let's look at this from a 30,000-foot perspective. This is April of 1980. There are now 3 dead females.
Correct.
All who were involved in some way, shape, or form in the sex work industry in Fall River.
Right.
This was right at the beginning of the hype of Satanic Panic in a very Catholic region of Massachusetts.
Oh, yes.
The feared man on the street is Carl Drew, who allegedly had the Satanic Cult and called himself the son of Satan.
Right.
I just put this is also maybe a good time to reference the Manson murders. These murders happened July and August of 1969, and so there was already a public fear of the dynamic of an evil leader juggling around women and using them as pawns.
Yes. That's such a good point.
And so investigators have 3 bodies, like you said, and they are continuing to investigate these murders. One of their drop-ins, as a side note, these detectives did weird, icky things during this drop-ins. They would bring weed and alcohol to this kind of group that they suspected as the cult. And the detectives' kind of defense to that was, we wanted them to trust us. We wanted to
almost develop street cred.
Yeah.
It's all cool, guys. We're not the bad guys. We just need some help.
Yeah.
Right?
So I don't know if that's allowed or if it's allowed now. Maybe it was in the 80s because remember the 80s was wild.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it is allowed if you're undercover, but I don't think they were operating undercover. Everybody knew that they were Fall River PD.
Right.
I don't know. Detectives would listen in on calls made by these members of the supposed cult. So especially at Sonny Sparta's apartment, this seems to be kind of the collection place for this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the people would say they were afraid if they didn't cooperate, they would be arrested, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So one day they were dropping in on Sonny Maureen Sparta, and she was a known associate of Robin Murphy, the 17-year-old sex worker who is now arguably a pimp in the area.
Mm-hmm.
Carl Drew, which is the son of Satan, the kind of ringleader that everybody thinks that he is, and Karen Marsden, who would end up being the 3rd victim.
Right. Yes.
That's where they would hang out.
Is at Sonny's apartment, right?
Sonny's apartment. Uh-huh. While investigators were there, Sonny receives a call from Robin Murphy, and wouldn't you know it, the cops were there to listen in.
How convenient.
Mm-hmm. On this call, Robin disclosed to Sonny that she was involved in Karen Marsden's murder and that investigators would never find her body.
Okay.
So investigators bring in Robin Murphy and Carl Drew and arrest them with the murder of Karen Marsden.
They arrested both of them?
Both of them. While in custody, Robin Murphy, the 17-year-old, told investigators that Karen Marsden was also her former lover.
Oh. Plot twist.
Yep. Karen had told Robin that she witnessed the murder of Doreen Levesque. We established that.
Correct.
She also shared that she witnessed the murder of Barbara Raposa, victim number 2. She shared that Andy Maltais was the killer of Barbara.
But Andy was Barbara's boyfriend.
Yes, and he was the guy who went to the police station.
The list.
Since the prosecution had no physical evidence tying either Maltais or Drew to Barbara Raposa or Karen Marsden's murder, what they ended up doing is they gave Robin a plea deal. Robin Murphy agreed to testify against Carl Drew and accept a plea of second-degree murder for her involvement in the murder of Karen Marsden. This plea deal also gave her immunity in Barbara Raposa and Doreen Levesque's cases.
Okay.
Are you following?
So if she pled guilty to second-degree murder for Karen, she would not be affiliated with or attached to the Barbara case nor the Doreen case.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Which would then probably, if she only has one quote unquote murder, lesser sentence, and possibly some parole.
Right.
Gotcha.
While on trial for Karen Marsden's murder, Carl Drew was also indicted for the October 1979 killing of Doreen Levesque. This is where the case gets super wild and convoluted, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on the trial because it's really important for later on.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I went through that quickly, but I seriously debated if I was going to turn this into a 3 or 4-parter.
Mm-hmm.
So now these trials really centered around the testimony of Robin Murphy, the 17-year-old girl.
Mm-hmm.
During her trial, Robin testified that she was possessed by Satan when she helped murder Karen Marsden. She added that Carl Drew was the ringleader of the sex work drug Satanic Cult, and she feared for her life as being the only reason she participated.
I'm okay. Oh, man. But I thought Robin was like the other pimp.
There was bad blood between Carl Drew and Robin Murphy.
Right.
And arguably, Carl Drew was the bigger, badder pimp. She's saying that he was over this Satanic Cult that was responsible for these murders, and that's why she got roped into this.
Gotcha. Okay, proceed.
Yeah. Sorry, I know this is really confusing.
No.
So Murphy testified that she was possessed by Satan and that Carl Drew was the ringleader of this Satanic Cult, and she feared for her life. She added that she wouldn't have killed Karen otherwise because they were lovers. So she's saying, I would never have hurt Karen. I cared about her, but the only reason I did is because I was afraid of Carl Drew.
And because she was possessed.
Yes.
Okay.
During the trial, it was established that from February to November of 1979, Karen Marsden had worked for Carl Drew as a sex worker in that kind of Bedford Street area of Fall River.
Mm-hmm.
So during the trial, it came out that Karen had also been a sex worker and Carl Drew essentially was her pimp.
I mean, I thought Robin was Karen's pimp.
They were lovers.
They were only lovers.
Yeah.
I need you to get a whiteboard out. I need you to write all this on a whiteboard.
I know.
Okay. So Carl is a pimp. Robin is a pimp. Karen is Robin's lover. But Karen was working for Carl as a sex worker. Okay. I got it.
Arguably.
Got it.
And Karen was the third victim, and Robin helped kill her, according to her testimony, but Carl was the ringleader.
Right, because Robin was possessed and then also doing what Carl wanted her to do because she was afraid of him.
Yes.
Gotcha. I'm here. Yes. We're straight. Yep. Straight as an arrow.
Robin Murphy also testified that on the evening of October 12th, 1979, it was Carl Drew who had killed Doreen Levesque, and she was a witness to this murder along with Karen Marsden and another individual. So Robin is at trial. She says, I was there during the murder of the third victim, Karen Marsden. Mm-hmm. And during her testimony, she says, I was also there during the murder of Doreen Levesque, and it was Carl who did that also. So she is saying that Carl is responsible for those two murders as of right now.
Correct. So number 1, Doreen, and number 3, Karen. Carl is the one who did those, according to Robin.
Correct. Yes. The theory goes that this is now what made Karen a target for Carl Drew, as we talked about before. Because she was a witness at the first murder of Doreen, he needed to shut her up because he saw that she was talking to investigators.
Yep.
He could not trust Karen to remain silent. But what about the other witness? Because, again, what Robin just said was that during Doreen Levesque's killing, it was her, Robin, Drew, and another person.
Right. There was a 4th person there.
Correct. So during Carl Drew's trial, Robin testified that the murder of Doreen, the first victim, was performed as a diabolic ritual, that the purpose of that was the soul of Karen Marsden was given to Satan. So Doreen was the sacrifice to give Karen's soul to Satan. That's what Robin said at this trial.
Okay.
Later in the trial, Robin would continue to testify that for Karen Marsden's murder, which she said she was a part of, that she, Carl Drew, and 2 other people had driven Karen to a wooded area of Westport, which is where, remember, her body was found, where they got out of the car and Robin began dragging Karen through the woods by her throat and hair. According to an article by Mark Falco, Carl Drew told Marsden to give Murphy a ring she was wearing, but she refused. So Drew cut her finger off to get it.
Cut Robin's finger off?
Cut Karen's finger off.
To get that ring off of her finger?
Yes.
Dang. That's like pinky promise business.
During this attack, Karen Marsden was allegedly beaten and raped. And then, according to Robin, Carl ordered her to cut Karen Marsden's throat. At this point, she said, Carl Drew then tore her head from her body.
Gross.
She said, quote, he just yanked and kicked the head, and then Carl carved an X on Karen's chest and spoke a different language. He then put his thumb into her blood and made an X on Robin's forehead and told her she was a member of the cult now. So this is what Robin Murphy is sharing during trial.
Okay.
That this is what's happened. Anybody who's interviewed for kind of speaking to that is like, no. It takes like inhuman strength to rip somebody's head off their body.
Okay, that's why I was like, he ripped her head off?
Yep.
I mean, I get that you can snap a neck, but to rip a head, I just was like, that's really, really, really hard for me to believe. And if it was done solely by quote unquote bare hands, that's really hard. That's really hard for me to believe.
Robin Murphy was then, according to her testimonies, ordered to perform oral sex on Karen's body.
Dead body? Headless body?
Yes.
Well, what is that going to do at this point?
It's a weird satanic ritual cult, Chelsea.
Well, it's not very logical, if you ask me.
This ritualistic killing as a sacrifice to Satan, according to Robin, was similar to the one performed earlier in October when Doreen Levesque was killed. So you can imagine how sensational this was for this town of Fall River in 1980.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes, in 1980, but really at this point, at any time. Like, this is crazy. This is hog wild.
I told y'all that this is a rabbit hole.
Hog wild. Okay, I'm just going to do a quick recap. So, Robin said that Robin and a couple other people and Carl take Karen, her lover, out into the woods. And Carl was like, hey, Karen, give that ring to Robin. And she's like, no. And so he cuts her finger off to get that ring. And then he tells Robin to grab Karen by the hair or whatever and drag her out into the woods.
Yes.
Right? And then once she's out in the woods, then Carl rips her whole head off, does some blood smearing business, and then tells her to go downtown on dead Karen?
Yes.
Y'all need to find some better hobbies.
That's where we're at. So that was the trial for Robin. During Carl Drew's trial...
No. Hold on. You said that was Carl Drew's trial.
That was all of Robin's testimonies for trials.
Okay.
For her trial and Carl Drew's trial.
Okay. That was all what Robin had
Robin
to say.
said.
Robin had to say. That's what Robin had to say about all this business. Between both of their trials.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, during his own trial, Carl Drew, he maintained his innocence, arguing that there is no physical evidence of his involvement in any of the murders. The prosecution initially attempted to try Carl Drew for both the murders of Doreen Levesque and Karen Marsden, as I said earlier when I said he was arrested.
Right.
But they decided to only take Karen Marsden's murder to trial.
Okay.
So his trial is for the murder of Karen Marsden.
Which, again, that's so weird to me because they never recovered a body. I mean, I guess they identified that skull fragment, but even still, I just feel like wouldn't the other case be a stronger case because they actually had the whole body?
Yes. And remember, I asked you guys to enter this with an open mind, right? And
am I doing it again? Am I getting ahead?
No. I think that's a great point. Like, yes, you're correct. There is no evidence, right? And just keep that little nugget of information. Okay. So again, during Carl Drew's trial, the other key witness for the prosecution were two women as their witnesses to testify against Carl Drew.
Right. Okay.
And these women were Carol Fletcher and Leah Johnson. Carol Fletcher testified that she and Robin Murphy, the 17-year-old pimp, if you will, and Carl Drew and a man named Carl Davis, Carol Fletcher is saying that these were the four players.
Okay.
They had taken Marsden to a densely wooded section of Westport near Family Beach to murder her, which is similar to the testimony that Robin Murphy gave. Carol's sworn testimony includes that she was present during Karen Marsden's murder and the decapitation of her. And she also identified Carl Drew as the leader and Robin as an accomplice, as Robin shared at her testimony.
Okay. So at this point, we have a lot, like this Venn diagram is overlapping nicely. We have a lot of good things going on in the middle.
Yes. And the other witness, Leah Johnson, was Carl's then ex-girlfriend, testifying that she was given a ring by Carl after Karen's murder.
Okay, there's the ring.
So Leah comes in and says, I was given this ring by my boyfriend at the time, Carl. And then during the trial, Karen Marsden's grandmother would end up positively identifying this ring as Karen's.
Oh,
so that's where this quote unquote evidence comes in.
So the ring was definitely Karen's because grandma says, oh yeah, no, that's Karen's.
Correct. A third woman, Sunny Sparta, remember she was the woman at the apartment. She was supposed to take the stand and testify in favor of the defense. So testify for Carl Drew.
Okay. She's on Carl's side.
But when she got on the stand, she refused to testify, invoking her Fifth Amendment right to remain silent.
Oh.
Keep that in mind because I'm going to circle back to that.
Okay, so Sunny is saying, I plead the Fifth. You can't make me talk, even though she was supposed to be Team Carl.
Yes.
All right.
So these women's testimony was quite damning for the jury.
Mm-hmm.
According to Dan Medeiros at the Herald News, Carl Drew was found guilty of Marsden's murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder of Karen Marsden, where he is still serving in Massachusetts Correctional Institution in Shirley.
Oh, dang.
Robin Murphy was given a life sentence in her role in Karen Marsden's murder, but was given the possibility of parole. Let's not forget about Andy Maltais.
I was going to say Andy, which is Barbara's boyfriend.
And Robin had said that he was involved in the murders too, in one way, shape, or form. So we're going to take a detour to Andy Maltais's trial.
Oh, he's on trial now.
Now he's on trial. So I want to start off by saying that during the course of the investigation into Doreen Levesque's murder and Barbara Raposa's disappearance, Andy Maltais frequently talked to police officials, ostensibly to offer information and assistance.
Why? Why is he talking to the police so much?
What do we hear all the time in these crime stories? Like, profilers are always like, look for these guys in the crowds because they're going to come back.
I was going to say, they're the ones who are always coming back and they're asking questions, or they might even like, hey, I'll help you with the investigation.
Yes.
Right? They're always wanting to come back because they get off on watching people be interested in what they did, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Andy Maltais frequently talked to the police, gave them information, yada, yada, yada. He was up their ass giving them theory that he reportedly heard on the streets. You know, like, he was their little, like, street rat.
Yes, rat. Street rat. I don't buy that.
That was beautifully placed. At one of the many voluntary meetings with investigators, Andy even showed up with Robin and Karen. Right. So during the investigation process, you know, way back when, he shows up with these two women to offer information to police about Doreen Levesque's murder. So during his trial, during Andy Maltais's trial, it was revealed that there were two similar accounts of the same odd thing that happened regarding Andy Maltais.
Okay. Which were?
One account, which was told by Robin in her testimony against Andy during his trial. The other was evidence from the investigators that Andy had intimate knowledge about Barbara Raposa's murder. Okay, so there are two pieces that are eerily similar. One is something that Robin would eventually testify against him at his trial. Okay. And the other is information he just regurgitated up to police, which is what got him on trial.
That he, quote unquote, confessed to.
Okay. The weird thing is that he said that he had had a dream.
Oh, he's prophetic?
Apparently, this dream that he described voluntarily to investigators started with two angels that showed him the murder of Barbara Raposa, which was his girlfriend.
Well, yeah, of course they did.
He said that as he floated into the air at treetop level, he saw a man carry a woman and drop her on the ground. This is his dream.
Right. Yes.
He recognized her as Barbara in his dream.
Yeah.
The man in this dream walked away and got an object. And this man returned, stood behind Barbara's head, lifted the object, which he described as a rock, and hit it over her head and struck the victim repeatedly in the face. Andy had stated that Barbara was overdosed on drugs. Otherwise, she would not have accompanied her killer to that area, and that's why she ended up there. And this is what he knew from his dream.
I mean, I've had some weird dreams, but it's usually like I'm naked at my school, or like
my teeth are falling out.
My teeth are falling. I was going to say, or my nose fell off one time. I was performing at a dance recital and I was spinning and my nose came off, all the way off.
Yeah, but not like prophetic.
Right.
Yeah, I saw the entire murder of my girlfriend.
Right.
This was the story that Andy Maltais voluntarily, mind you, told investigators on February 5th, 1980. Now remember, Andy Maltais dated Barbara Raposa.
Yes.
And he was also the rumored father of her 2-year-old son.
Oh.
He was in his 40s at the time of her murder and during her trial.
Okay.
And while he was playing volunteer poster boy, he signed a consent form for authorities to search his home and his car. So he tells them this dream. Investigators are like, that's Cap.
Right.
And so they're like, hey, will you voluntarily sign permission for us to search all your shit? And he's like, yes.
Because he's innocent. Of course he's innocent because he's a prophet.
Yeah. Officers did the search and they found 2 paper bags during the search. These pieces of evidence that they took from his car,
The 2 paper bags.
the 2 paper bags, Robin, during trial, would say, I saw those bags in his car while it was parked near this plant on November 7th, 1979, which was the murder site of Barbara Raposa.
I was going to say that's the murder site of Barb.
Yes. Because remember when Robin got arrested, she also claimed that Andy Maltais was responsible for Barbara Raposa's murder. And that's one of the reasons he was arrested.
Correct.
So also presented as evidence in Maltais's trial was an instance where, according to Justia U.S. law and court documents of his trial, at the request of the district attorney, Maltais examined a newspaper photograph of the area where the body was found, and he marked on the photograph the space where he was floating in the air, and that was where the murder had occurred. So also on his trial, what was presented into evidence was the evidence that Maltais, when working with investigators, used a newspaper clipping to show them where he was floating in his dream, where Barbara was murdered, and where they found her body. Okay. And he had explained that he had never seen this place before, but somehow he knew the exact location because of his dream.
Because of his dream. That's right.
I told y'all this is wild. This is crazy. Okay, so Andy Maltais is on trial. Robin says, that's Cap. He did this. Police investigators did searches, found the stuff in his car, which matches Robin's testimony.
Right.
He had this crazy dream, and investigators are like, he is crazy and wild, and we know that he obviously had something to do with it, right?
Right.
So because of all of this, especially because of Robin's testimony, Andy Maltais was convicted for the murder of Barbara Raposa.
I mean, right.
So in January of 1981, Andy Maltais was convicted for the first-degree murder of Barbara Raposa and was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole.
Okay.
Okay. I hope this is like not too much for you guys, but this is just my opinion. When I've listened to other stories about the Fall River murders, it's usually presented in a way that makes it very cut and dry and very black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a reason why I've chosen to make this so nitty gritty. And I know it's a little confusing, but I think it's going to make sense as we start putting bows on this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as a quick summary, right? Robin Murphy, the 17-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
testified at both Carl Drew and Andy Maltais's trials.
And her own.
Yes. She named Carl Drew as the primary perpetrator,
Like the ringleader. Uh-huh.
as Karen Marsden's killer, and also Doreen Levesque, right?
Right.
And she named Andy Maltais as Barbara Raposa's murder.
Yes.
Carl Drew vehemently denied any involvement in any of the murders, and Andy denied having any involvement in the murder of Barbara Raposa, his ex-girlfriend.
Right.
At the end of all of these lengthy trials, Robin, with her plea of the second-degree murder, she got life in prison with the possibility of parole, as we said.
Right.
Carl Drew, convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. Same thing for Andy. No one was ever prosecuted for the murder of Doreen.
Why? Because they just figured Carl was going to be punished for Karen and they could just lump Doreen.
They didn't have any evidence for Doreen. There was no evidence.
What do you mean there's no evidence?
Tying Carl Drew to the murder, there was no evidence of Doreen Levesque. What evidence did they have other than eyewitness testimony?
I mean, there was probably evidence. Did they look for evidence?
I'm just saying, legally speaking, presented to the courts, there was no evidence. The only quote unquote evidence they had for his involvement for Karen Marsden's murder was that ring.
Right. And then the only thing that they had on Doreen was Karen saying that he was part of it, but Karen's dead.
Mm-hmm.
What am I missing? Am I missing something? Like, I feel like I'm missing something.
This is where we're going to end it for the first part.
Ew, I feel like I'm back in the 90s, like, watching TV, and you have, like, a great episode, and then you have that super 90s font, and it's like, to be continued. And you're like, no.
Yeah, and so, listen, it's a lot. This whole thing is just crazy.
So go find a seatbelt, get that thing installed, because when you come back, make sure that your seatbelt is fastened at all times, and arms and legs are kept inside the vehicle.
Yes. The reason I stopped it here is because there's not really a good breaking point after this. It becomes like a pretzel hooked in like those games that you would try to solve at crack. That's where we're at so far. And so y'all expect that the next episode's probably going to be a little bit longer because we are going to get in it, man. I'm telling you.
Okay.
Tune in maybe tomorrow, maybe Friday. It's going to be kind of whatever tickles our fancy when we release this.
All right.
See you next time.
On the flip side. Bye, guys. Hey Wildside Tribe, don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Wildside Podcast.
Make sure to tune in on Wildside Wednesdays. New episodes will drop each Wednesday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.
We would love to hear from you, so if you have a wild case recommendation, email us at wildsidepodcast@gmail.com. That's wildside with a C. Or share your thoughts in the comments below.
As always, if you haven't heard it today, you're loved, you're worthy, and you're valuable. And we'll catch you on
the flip side.